I want to pivot now to our friend Bill Gardner, who's going to talk about narratives and the power of narratives to help us understand religion and entrepreneurship. Bill.
Great. I'm going to turn my timer on so I stay within the 15 minutes start. That's not it. Okay. Well, I'll try to keep on track. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. And the presentations today have been really wonderful to follow. I just posted on the chat a couple things. One is a folder. If you go to that link, anything that I'm talking about, all my slides, all of the references, it's all there. And then also, I'm giving a presentation, a webinar for Babson next Wednesday on the humanities and entrepreneurship for about an hour. And that link there as well, if you want to join, that'd be great. So now let's see whether I can share. This presentation had a lot of different aspects to kind of where it's going. My interest is in the nature of the humanities and literature and its relationship to entrepreneurship. Did a special issue, which I'll talk about shortly. So let's go to the next slide. So to me, the goal of this presentation is how can fiction inform entrepreneurship? Okay, next slide, which is, as I said, I'm doing this thing beyond business, integrating entrepreneurial thinking and liberal arts. So there's a link there, but also just go into chat. You can find the link there and then go to that. I'd love to see you next Wednesday. Next slide. So really, in some ways, where I'm taking this is kind of this kind of a summary actually of the presentation. This was an editorial that appeared in the New York Times about the value of where literature goes. So I'll just read this. What this war exposes then is a failure not only of strategy, but of literacy. Literature and history at their most serious train precisely the faculties these leaders lack. The capacity to grant that other minds are not transparent to us and are governed by purposes not our own. A mind tutored by history and literature knows that actors in the grip of a sacred cause tend to mean what they say, and that bombing a founding myth is more likely to consecrate it than to dissolve it. And then a comment actually that just came out from the Iranian embassy in South Africa in relationship to this, I think to give people a sense that, these founding myths are really, really key. And if we don't appreciate the other, we're in trouble. So Taran Stippelguns responded in the social media. This is after Trump had basically said he's going to uh, bomb around to the Stone Age. At a time when you were still in caves searching for fire, we were inscribing human rights on the Cyrus cylinder. We endured the storm of Alexander the Great and the Mongol invasions and remained because Iran is just not a country, it's a civilization. So I think in some respects, kind of this issue of kind of founding myths, kind of where things go in the nature of fictions are really, really key to kind of inform people to where they are. Next slide. Entrepreneurship is creating value for others. Kind of where I want to take that is basically if you take that as your definition of entrepreneurship, which I do, then the next slide is what is valuable and what are others? Okay. And I want to kind of quickly get into the nature of philosophy and then kind of into the nature of fiction. So the next slide is prize, prize, praise, and perform. I've got a whole bunch of uh, readings basically on the philosophy of value and how important value is. And I just suggest you read them. I don't really have a lot of time to kind of like go through them, but I think the one thing that would really be interesting in entrepreneurship right now is for more scholars to think about what value is about, and I can see that really in a lot of our presentations today have really been about what's valuable and how do we sense that in kind of who we are and what we do. And that leads to the next slide, customer value propositions in relationship to Lutheran ministers. Before I came to Babson, I had a joint appointment at Copenhagen Business School, but also at California Lutheran University, where I had the delight of every year doing uh, workshops with Lutheran ministers and basically spending time uh, um, on customer value propositions. So and the business canvas. And the interesting thing about these customer value propositions, particularly for the first time I did it, is we spent about half hour looking at, when you do CVPs about, what are the customers' pains, what are their gains, what are their jobs to do. So we're kind of like doing for this a half hour. I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and kind of one of the kind of pains and gains of being a Roman Catholic is, you have this thing about the nature of heaven and hell. And the Lutheran ministers did not mention heaven or hell once as a pain or gain in relationship to kind of like what they were doing in terms of adding value to the customer value proposition. And I kind of asked him, I said, we've spent a half an hour talking about kind of pains and gains, and a lot of this has been about daycare and other kinds of things and about community, but you never talked about heaven or hell. And one of the Lutheran ministers stood up and basically said, well, it just kind of doesn't sell, which to me was kind of like a weird kind of challenge about the nature of things to say, oh my God, that's not a CBP for you. But my co-presenter to this, who kind of, I would say more of an evangelical Lutheran, basically came to me and poked me in my chest and said, Bill, so this is one of the reasons why mainstream Lutheranism is doing very well, is that, the CVP of basically offering daycare in Lutheran churches isn't necessarily going to be something compelling to a lot of people. Anyway, so I bring this up to say, you know, re kind of the religious aspects about value are really, really important. I'm really glad when I hear these presentations to see how important that comes to the forefront of where we kind of go in relationship to things. So now we're going to kind of explore the nature of fiction and what fiction can say in relationship to religion and where that is, but also in religion in relationship to entrepreneurship. So the next slide is Tolstoy, Master and Man. I want to just briefly indicate that I put this reading in there. It's a really rich reading. If you can get a copy of George Sanders' book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, he devotes a whole chapter to Tolstoy's Master and Man, which is way beyond what I can provide for this. But I do want to say that what this story is about is the nature of how transformation happens and how one can understand and begin to perceive the value of other people. It's basically about um, a very, very rich man, Vasily, who has a chance to buy property, but it's a stormy, one of those stormy winter nights. But he wants to make the deal done, and he takes his servant with him, Nikolai, on a sled. And very quickly, I'd say the story is about they kind of go around in circles. They get lost. They go to a particular town. They have a chance to stay overnight, which they don't. So then they go back into the forest, get lost again. The sled gets stuck. And basically, Vasily realizes he's going to die and he's going to freeze to death. But he also realizes that he's responsible for his servant Nikolai and realizes that he needs to do something to save him. And this transformation, though, takes place over this whole story. To me, very powerful about how that happens. And and so basically, Vasily ends up saving Nikolai by basically putting himself on Nikolai, wrapping his coat around him, and then with his warmth saving him. And basically, Vasily freezes to death. Nikolai lives. There's kind of like a lot of issues about how that works, but it's a powerful story to me about the nature of, again, trying to understand how and why people make the decisions they make, and how and why they're able to again begin to perceive the value of other people. So, very powerful story. Won't get into it because the one I really want to get into is the next slide, Karen Blixen's Babette's Feast. And I'm not sure how many of you have seen the movie, which is a great movie. It won the first Danish uh, award, Academy Award for a foreign film. But the short story is fabulous from Karen Blixen. And quickly, what that story is about, and again, it doesn't do justice to about it, is that basically there's two women who've gotten older. They used to be young beauties. They'd worked for their father, who was a pastor in this particular Ford area in Norway. And as the congregation and they got older, there was kind of a lot of bitterness about how things worked. In the meanwhile, kind of over these years, they ended up taking in a woman from France, Babette, who one of the sisters' old beaux had suggested as someone that should live for them. And so she had been basically, Babette had been them for 15 years, kind of impoverished, poor, and kind of cooked food for them. And then, as chance would have it, one of the things that Babette had had someone do for her for many, many years was buy a lottery ticket, which she won, and it came with 10,000 francs. So Babette said to the sisters, I'd love to prepare a meal for everyone to celebrate my winning the lottery. And so the sister said, fine. And so she prepares this fabulous meal for, and so it has a lot of religious connotations because there's 12 people who show up for the meal. And one of the people who shows up is basically the General Lowenstein, who had actually been at one point a suitor for one of the other sisters, and she'd rejected him, but he was at the meal. And so this wonderful meal is served, multiple courses, and the townspeople are kind of really struggling with what to do because this is so lavish and they've never had food like this. And the interesting thing is Lowenstein basically begins to talk about how fabulous this meal is and how it compares to a meal he'd had at Café Anglais in Paris many, many years ago before the revolution. And as all of the dishes happen, he kind of becomes more and more enthused with how fabulous this meal is and how transformational it is. And at one point, he stands up, and I want to read kind of this issue because it goes into where one of the earlier presentations today was on, and that's the nature of grace. So he stands up at one point during this fabulous meal and says, Man, my friends, is frail and foolish. We have all been told that grace is to be found in the universe, but in our human foolishness and short-sightedness, we imagine divine grace to be finite. For this reason, we tremble. We tremble before making our choice in life, and having made it again, tremble in fear of having chose wrong. But the moment comes when our eyes are open, and we see and realize that grace is infinite. Grace, my friends, demands nothing from us but that we shall await it with confidence and acknowledge it in gratitude. Grace, brothers, make no condition, singles out none of us in particular. Grace takes us all into its bosom and proclaims general amnesty. See, that which we've chosen is given to us, and that which we've refused is also and at the same time granted us. I, that which we've rejected is poured upon us abundantly, for mercy and truth have met together, and righteousness and bliss has kissed one another. So that's kind of the kind of like summary of the meal. Lowenstein so enthusiastic about it. Everyone kind of like leaves. And they're all kind of like wonderfully transformed in a lot of ways. And so then at the end of the meal, the next day, Babette's washing dishes, isn't it? And the two ladies say, "Well, now that you won all this money and you've had this fabulous dinner, we're really sad that you'll be leaving." And Babette says, "Well, no, that's not the case at all. I spent the entire $10,000 on the meal." And they said, "What do you mean?" And she says, "Well, I was actually the chef at the Cafe Anglais that General Lowenstein had talked about. And during the revolution, I lost that business, and that's how I ended up here. But I've spent all the money on the on the on the meal that you had." And so here's kind of like how the sisters talk about it, which I think is quite wonderful, and also too about the nature of kind of what kind of how people think about things. Okay. Dear Babette, you ought not to have given away all you had for your sake. And Babette, given her mistress a deep glance, a silent glance, where there's not pity, even scorn at the bottom of it. For your sake, Babette said. No, for my own. She rose from the chopping block, stood up between the two sisters, and said, I am a great artist, she said. She waited a moment and then repeated, I'm a great artist, mesdames. And for a long time there was a deep silence. Then Martine said, So you will be poor now all your life. And Babette said, Poor? No, I shall never be poor. I told you I'm a great artist. A great artist, mesdames, is never poor. We have something, mesdames, of which other people know nothing. Um, so it's an interesting story about the nature of kind of what a gift is. Here's this gift basically of a chef giving this fabulous dinner of which some of the people get. General Lowenstein, who has had dinners like this, understands kind of what bounty has been provided. But in many ways, the gift is basically about the nature of the giver, not necessarily those who receive it. So I'm going to quickly go through a few of the other things, guys. I can talk more about the Babette's feast, but I kind of want to move on to say and this is the next thing, fiction in the entrepreneurial imagination. I did a wonderful set of articles in entrepreneurship and regional development, which sure you're all seeing. They're doing that wonderful uh, special issue on entrepreneurship and religion. It's a pioneering journal in a lot of ways. I hope it becomes 4 stars sooner or later. But we did a special issue with Matthias and Roy and Jennifer, and I've got all the articles published on that folder for you to look at. And then my last slide, basically, here's things that I use to think about the nature of how fiction informs kind of entrepreneurship and also reality in general. Robert Cole's book, The Call of Stories, kind of got me involved in the nature of how fiction works in terms of how we think about kind of who we are and what we do. Rita Sharon has been doing narrative medicine for about 20 years. I've taken her workshops at Columbia, but The Principles and Practice of Narrative Medicine is a powerful book, particularly about how narrative is used in medicine. Lots of practical advice there. I've added the story, what to do with stories, the science of narrative medicine, which is important. And then also, if you haven't seen this article that just came out, How Do Religious and Secular Social Entrepreneurs' Identities Trigger Their Pro-Social Motivations and Action Processes, I suggest you look at that. Um, so I'm going to leave it there. And then I think do I have any time to open up for questions? I think that's over.
I think it's
I'm
over.
done.
We need to continue the conversation.
Okay.
So, Bill, I am deeply grateful and
Well,
moved. This is beautiful.
thank you. And I
Thank
hope
you.
I'll see all of you next Wednesday. So kind of like go to there and then thing. Great. Sorry.
Wonderful. Thank you. No, perfect.